The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Municipal governments are the tier closest to their citizens. Do they also reflect the diversity of the communities they serve? Tonight, during Local Government Week here in Ontario, we'll find out about that. Then we'll hear how a new department at the Art Gallery of Ontario is bringing the art of the African diaspora to eager audiences. And from Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole's take on the last election to Ontario's next election, we've got the agendas we can review. It's Friday, October 22nd, and that's next on the agenda. This time next year, voters will be casting ballots for who will represent them in their local, city, and regional councils. It's the level of government most directly involved with delivering services to citizens, but is a diverse enough slate of candidates coming forward to reflect the communities they serve. Let's get some perspective from 4 elected officials, all in their municipalities. Lynn Dolan, Mayor of Innisfil and Deputy Warden of the County of Simcoe, Timmins City Councillor Kristen Murray, Peterborough City Councillor Kemi Akapo, and Oakville Town Councillor Jasvinda Sandhu. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Really excited to have this conversation because it seems like everywhere you look, there's an election happening. But as I said, municipal elections are really, really important. And Lynn, I wanted to start with you. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario, or AMO, just launched a campaign called We All Win. What is the goal of this campaign?
Thanks, Nam. We All Win promotes the understanding that municipal governments serve the public better when they reflect the diversity of their communities. We think that having that diverse voice makes stronger and more sustainable communities. Municipalities are the most accountable level of government, and we all win when the most accountable level of government is accountable to everyone.
And, you know, when we talk about who's representing who in these elections, in local elections, you know, everybody has a unique story. And I wanted to ask this question for all of you about how you started in this journey. Kemi, I wanted to start with you. You came to Ontario as an international student from Nigeria, correct?
That's correct.
How did you get, and how did you become interested in running for office?
Well, it was a bit of a long journey for me. Though I never actually anticipated becoming a politician, though I probably should have, because when I was a student at Trent University, I got involved with the Trent Central Student Association, which is essentially the student governing board for students at Trent, undergraduate students at Trent. So that really catapulted me into the life of politics, I would say. I saw that there were different needs that students had on campus, and I wanted to be a voice for the students and represent them. And then fast forward a couple of years, I started to get more involved in the city of Peterborough itself. And I noticed that the city council of the day did not reflect the Peterborough that I knew and the Peterborough that a lot of the residents that I interacted with knew as well. So I thought, well, there needs to be a voice that represents these people. And that really is what spurred me to decide to run and to be on city council.
I know you said there was a little bit of trepidation in running, but since you are now in that position to affect change, what would you say has maybe been the most impactful moment for you?
There have been several. I would say for me, some of the more impactful moments is when we're designing policy, because policy is really key and really does affect people on their everyday lives. So, for example, we recently have hired a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer for the city of Peterborough, which is a role that we never had before. So I believe our city council took a good step forward to hire this person and to ensure that anything that our municipality does has at least that lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the residents.
And Kristen, I wanted to come to you next. Hearing some of the accomplishments that Kemi has already had, what made you decide to run for office?
Yeah, I think multiple factors played into my decision. It's pretty obvious that in 2018, early 2018, the Human Rights Commissioner did visit the city of Timmins and mentioned that there was pervasive racism within our city, being mixed race, Indigenous, and Black woman. It just made sense for me to put my name forward. I've been working in this community for over 20 years, and knew some of the needs, some of the things that needed to be addressed. And quite honestly, I had never seen anyone like myself around council table in the time that I've been in Timmins. So I just felt it necessary to have representation. It's so important.
Have you, since you have been in your position, because we do hear about all the barriers, we're going to talk about some of those barriers coming up in a few moments, but was there any moment when you were in the process of running that maybe you thought, this isn't for me?
I think there were some instances, you really prepare yourself for the worst, because growing up mixed race in northern community, it's pretty obvious that not everyone looks like you. So, my upbringing, moving from, Jane and Finch area in Toronto to Northern Ontario, really prepared me for a lot of what I would face as an adult. So I prepared myself for what conversations I thought would come, but honestly, I was surprised that it wasn't really something that people focused on, was my race. It was more about, my conversations. But at the same time, I felt, I didn't want people to label me as maybe Black, Indigenous, or a woman. And that's what I was standing on. It was really about some of the experiences, some of the skills and abilities that I bring to the table, not necessarily, the color of my skin. But that does also allow me to bring a different voice to the table. So it's been a great journey so far.
Jasminda, hearing what Kristen was talking about, we do hear a lot about how we're so much more than just what we look like. We bring so much more to the table than the color of our skin, our gender, but it's also about the policies and our education, all those things. You have a really unique background. You were actually born in the UK and you emigrated from the US. What made you decide to run for office here in Ontario?
That's a really good question, Nam. And I think hats off to my council colleagues on the panel here, because it's kind of a similar thread and story. For me, it was always a vested interest. So being a newer Canadian, I've only been here for about 13 years. I saw a very kind of stark dichotomy between what we were kind of seeing around the council table and what I was seeing in my local community. And for me, as a young parent and a young advocate, I'm a lawyer, I was seeing kind of the lack of advocacy that I needed for things that were happening in our part of the town. So the part of the town that we live in is a newer part of Oakville, a lot of intense development in the area, and I wasn't seeing what I wanted as a resident. So I really thought that with that passion behind what I was seeing, I was going to be able to make a difference at the table. And I think my key takeaway for everybody that I talk to now and all the youth that I speak to on a pretty regular basis is you just can't be afraid. You have to go.
But that's great that you said that. I have this little thing that whenever I'm asked to do something that I'm afraid, I feel like that's when I should do it, like feel the fear and do it anyway. But were there moments that maybe you felt like this is a lot? Yes, you didn't see yourself represented, but to step into those positions also does take a lot of courage, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's with anything that we start new, and I think that's with anything that is difficult, quite frankly. I mean, running for politics isn't something that's easy. I will say that there are always times where things become a little bit difficult. And for me, having a young family, that was really kind of that mom guilt that trickled in through everything else that's in my daily life, even with my full-time job during the day. But you kind of just have to push past it and say, you know what, I'm doing this for not just myself, but also for my family and for everybody else. And there's always that light at the end of the tunnel.
And Lynn, what about yourself? What got you into politics?
Well, I've been in politics. I was first elected in 1994. My father was the one who kind of put the bug in my ear. And in 1991, when we were undergoing some amalgamations, but I had a toddler and was pregnant at the time. And certainly you didn't see any pregnant women on council in those days. And so I decided in 1994 I would try it because, after all, my youngest was going into JK and I was going to have all this time on my hands. So that's when I first decided to run. And I can totally relate to the mom guilt. And now that little guy has been married for 2 years.
Well, this is yes, Jasminda.
Sorry, Nam, I just wanted to jump in there to the mayor's comment. So I actually had a baby just before I ran for council. So I was on mat leave because I had so much time, right? And then during my first couple of years on council, I actually had another child. So I can completely relate, Mayor. I completely understand.
Jasvinda, you're making us all look bad.
No.
It's so great to hear all those stories because, as you all said, that representation does matter, and when you see it, you can be it. I wanted to bring in some numbers. According to AMO, in the last municipal election in 2018, only 27% of all candidates were women. I wanted to get an idea from all of you what you thought why that is. And Kemi, I wanted to start with you. What might be the main deterrents to this lack of diversity?
That's a good question, and I think there are a couple of deterrents, and two that I can think of are, one is term limits. So as most of us know, folks who are incumbents are more likely to win if they choose to run again. So if you were sort of a newbie and you're running against a slate of incumbents, the chances of you winning and getting in are a little bit lower, particularly your first time around. So I think term limits is a thing that should be started and implemented rather, because it allows time for people to come in, do their work, and then exit and create space for other people as well. I also think that for most, at least in Ontario, councillors are a part-time position. So if you do not have that flexibility with your other job, if you don't have support at home, if you do have a family to take care of the family to assist you in that, it really is difficult to choose to run, knowing that you're going to be, working essentially two full-time jobs with the lack of support. So I think term limits and being part-time are two of the bigger deterrents, particularly for women.
Just to build on what Kemi just said, Kristen, I don't know if a lot of people know that it's when you are a counselor, it is part-time work. What else do you think might be a deterrent to the lack of diversity that we're seeing?
I can definitely agree with what Kemi's saying about the part-time work, because I do have a full-time job in addition to being in post-secondary education, as well as raising two daughters as well. So I think that was the feedback that I got during my campaign, is how are you going to do this? It's just people's ideas or the criticisms around that mom guilt that some of the other panelists had mentioned before. And I also think that sometimes, if you don't have women on council, there's not this idea that I can do that too. So luckily for me in Timmins, there was a really strong counselor already elected. So I guess an incumbent, as Kemi had mentioned, and I really did look up to her because she just was like a force to be reckoned with. So having those people you can draw from as sort of motivation or inspiration is also needed as well. So panels like this really allowing us to speak and have other people hear about our experiences, because we started from nowhere. We weren't born politicians, but we grew into the roles that we have now. So.
Okay, I don't know if I'm really old or showing my age. When you said that, I just thought of Drake, started from the bottom, now we're here. Apologies to my children who are probably really embarrassed at this point. But Jasvinda, Kristen mentioned, maybe the importance of having someone, a mentor, perhaps. What do you think are some of the other deterrents when we do talk about this lack of diversity?
Well, I think Kristen hit one of the nails on the head, like very, very succinctly. It was very kind of common during the election for me, for people to ask, oh, well, you're a very busy full-time lawyer, you work on Bay Street, and how are you going to have time for me, your family, and this? And I don't think that—
Is it annoying that, yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
do men get that same kind of question?
I don't think so. And certainly the other gentlemen that I've interviewed on council about the same thing have kind of alluded to the fact that they're not asked things like that. So I think that if you're thinking about things being a deterrent, I think that might be one of them is, how am I actually going to be able to manage all of this? We face a little bit more from a social pressure perspective. And I think that we face a little bit more just generally as people. We're like, okay, well, how am I actually going to make time for all of this when I already feel like I'm spread thin? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to build on what you were saying and ask Lynn, because I think we were talking about seeing the totality of an individual, but if you're knocking on doors and people are seeing a woman at the door and then they're making all of these assumptions, Lynn, how do we move away from that? And what are the deterrents can you add as why we're seeing this lack of diversity?
Well, I would agree that part-time is an issue, and I would argue that it is a part-time pay but a full-time job. And also that when you are first elected to council, when I was first elected to council, I think I paid more in childcare than I made. So that is definitely a deterrent. The good news is that when there's men and women equally on the ballot, they're elected as many times. It's just getting the names on the ballots, which is the hard part. And I would say another big deterrent, and probably would have, if social media was around when I first ran, I probably wouldn't be here.
Why not?
Just dealing with the comments, and women particularly get much more negative and nasty comments on social media than men do.
Is anyone else here on social media, or do you stay away from it? Kemi, I see you nodding.
Yeah, so when I first started, I was on every platform. I was on Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, I was on there. And as time went on, I slowly started to remove myself from some of those platforms, just because, the time to check and respond to everything was a lot, and it's just me, I don't have an assistant. But also the amount of vitriol that was being sent my way was I couldn't handle it, and it was too much. And I said, I don't deserve this. And my role as a counselor is not to deal with this hate that's being spewed towards me. So I've limited myself to just a couple of platforms now, which I find a little bit more manageable. But I 100% agree with the mayor, and that social media really has a huge impact, and more negative than positive.
Social media can be one of those tools that you are, accessible to the people that you're serving, but then you're getting all this other stuff. Kristen, I saw you nodding before.
Yeah, like Kemi, I started out on all of the social platforms, and I think it's because, I really ran a grassroots campaign with not a lot of money. My plan was not to take away from my children in order to campaign. So I utilized the resources that I had, and as time progressed, I realized where I was spending time, and I prefer a really formal way of communicating with people, in terms of, I have a city issued phone number as well as email, and I think sometimes Facebook is just a different way to communicate, and it's not necessarily one that's effective in the way that I like to communicate with people. So I've backed off personally and professionally from Facebook. I love my Instagram. I'll probably never let that go. So I do have professional Instagram, as well as, Twitter is something I haven't really, mastered yet. So But
Kristen, I'm with you. I don't know if I can quit my Instagram, but just Vinda, Kristen brought up something that's really interesting, which is money. And a lot of people might not know that municipal candidates must fund and manage their own campaigns. In what ways do you think does this create barriers for communities that are historically underrepresented?
I mean, I think that the fact that they may not have access to funds in the same way would be an extreme deterrent. I think the counter to that, and the kind of positive to take away from this going forward, I think for any municipality, is to make sure that they can either bring things to council, so that council can approve the fact that there could be some type of a reimbursement structure, maybe not for the candidate, but maybe for people that wanted to contribute to that person's campaign, so that they're not carrying the brunt of all of the costs. That's certainly something that we do here in Oakville. We do a 50% return for anybody who'd like to contribute to a candidate's campaign, and I think that that's beneficial for a lot of folks.
Lynn, some people might not know exactly what the functions of municipal councils. Can you give us a quick snapshot of what all of you do?
Yeah, basically everything that you take for granted is what municipal councils do. You turn on the tap and water comes out. You flush the toilet and it goes away. You put your bag of garbage out at the end of the driveway and it disappears. Not to mention the parks, the recreation programming, libraries. There's just so much that municipal councils do, and we do it on 9 cents of the tax dollar.
And Kemi, did you want to add anything to that?
Lynn has hit the nail on the head. And another big one is transportation, which is one of my portfolios. So anytime you drive on the roads, or if you take public transit, that is your municipal government at work. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's the municipal government until something doesn't work, or doesn't work the way you want it to. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, who's responsible for this? Let me complain.
Well, how do we change that? Because I think when we talk about the federal election, it seems to be more, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it just seems to capture everybody's attention. When we do talk about municipal elections, this is stuff that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So, Kristen, how do we get people to be more involved, to participate more, to vote? Because these are things that are affecting their lives on a day-to-day basis.
I think one of the things that was important during my campaign is we had kind of like a spreadsheet in terms of what the municipal politics does impact within our community, right? So getting people to realize that, the simple things like the roads, the water are a municipal issue, not necessarily federal. So it's not everyone follows politics at our level quite closely as they do with the federal election, unfortunately. But I think that has a lot to do with, media, the news, having bigger budgets. But I think, as we spread awareness about our function, I think people will really come to appreciate our roles.
And Jasminda, in your area, what is the voter turnout like?
Very low. I mean, in comparison to the federal and the provincial elections, we're looking at around 27 to 30% turnout in the town of Oakville when it comes to municipal election. I think the challenge that we face is not only getting the word out to folks, but also just generally interest. We're dealing with the stuff that, the mayor just mentioned it, it's the mundane. It's the stuff that's not typically a fancy topic that people are really kind of thinking about, maybe even on a daily basis, even though their days are impacted by municipal government on a daily basis. I think that we've been really kind of focusing hard over the last little bit and really kind of trying to work hard with our local youth through the AMO Youth Engagement Council to check to see if there's something that we can do to help youth become engaged in municipal politics at a very early age and an earlier level. And I think that if they're able to carry that on over, high school and through university, that interest will continue to grow. And then we won't have the same level of turnout because they'll already be engaged at that young level and continue on.
In our final minutes here, I want to ask everybody else that same question. Lynn, I'd like to start with you. What is the voter turnout for you, and what are some things that we can do to get more people involved from a wide pool of candidates?
Yes, we also have quite a low voter turnout, and certainly we need to
Do you know what percentage?
work on that. I would say about 37%. We did see a bit of an uptick when we went to electronic voting because we do have seasonal residents, so that did help. But I think just being the mentors and mentorship is something I think that's extremely important, and tapping people on the shoulder and encouraging them to put their name forward, I think would help.
How do you do that? Because I know in the past for you were discouraged from, you had some experiences where because another woman was running, there was this idea that maybe two women couldn't run. How do we change that?
Absolutely. We have to change that because women also have to support other women. And we need, when I knock on a door and somebody would say to me, why aren't you at home looking after your children? We need to change those voices. And
sorry, my mouth is, I can't believe people would say that. Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine, and it has gotten better. There's no question about that. But we just need to support each other. Mentorship is so important. I'm very fortunate to have former Mayor McCallion as a mentor, and she has been such a solid person that to count on.
And Kristen, what's the voter turnout in your region? And also, when we think about next year's municipal elections, what are some ways in which we can ensure we get a wider pool of candidates, and that's more women, more racialized people, more youth, new immigrants? Kristen?
So in 2018, there was about more than half of the people eligible to vote came out and vote. And I think there was some contentious issues happening within the city that really allowed for people to be engaged during the election period. So we had a really good turnout at the last election, surprisingly. And I think really to get people engaged is for them to be. That's a really tough question because I think, our community is diverse, but there are some factors as to why people don't put their name forward.
What are some of those factors?
I think really having to be that name for the group, so myself, I'm the voice for Indigenous people, I'm the voice for Black people, and that's not necessarily correct, right? Because I think, we all have various experiences, individual experiences. I may support a lot of issues that are very diverse, but to say I speak for every person of a certain race isn't so. So I think that's a deterrent in some ways because you're really called to task when there's issues, right? People will call me and ask me, well, why did you vote a certain way on this? You're Indigenous, you should have voted this way. So I think that there's those factors that really deter a lot of people. But at the same time, I think if you think about all the positives that are to come from it and the change that's made, and you just making, my daughters, they look up to some of the conversations that I have. They're really paying attention to what's happening in the community. They call me to task on potholes on my street. So I think, it's really interesting to see how people are engaged.
We have about 2 minutes. Kemi, I'll give you 1 minute, and Jasvinda, I'll give you the last minute. Kemi?
Yeah, so our voter turnout here was also low. I believe it was 33%. But I agree with Lynn that having electronic voting is certainly helpful and allows more people to engage. One thing that we can do is, it's all been mentioned before, but certainly being that mentor role, I think, is key. Just last night, I spoke with a bunch of newcomers to Canada, most of whom have only been here for about 2 months. And I talked to them about, what does government look like in Canada? What roles do municipal governments play? How can they get involved? And then I had 2 people email me after saying, you know what, I might be interested in politics further down the line. Can we set up a one-on-one conversation? So I think it's those one-on-one conversations that really do make such a huge difference.
And Jasvinda, you've got 30 seconds.
Sure. I'll just kind of layer onto that and say that the tide is really kind of turning. That mentorship piece really matters. We went from 7% women on Oakville's council before 2018 to now 40%. So that mentorship is certainly something that's helpful because the more people we see that look like us, the more people will actually want to put their names forward.
When you see it, you can be it. Thank you all so much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it. And I'm guessing you'll be running again next year. So best wishes. And for more information on the We All Win campaign, you can log on to amo.ca. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Late last year, the Art Gallery of Ontario announced the creation of the Department of Arts of Global Africa and the Diaspora. Its first full exhibition is now on display. TVO's diversity and inclusion reporter, Ashley Okwosa, checked in on how that came together and how it's already building community. She joins us now from Ontario's capital city. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, Jan.
All right, so for your article, you sort of talk about an art collector from Windsor, an AGO curator, and how they sort of were instrumental in bringing this art to the AGO. Sort of bring us, catch us up to speed on sort of how that all came together.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting story. So Kenneth Montague is a dentist, an art collector, and he's also one of the trustees at the AGO. And Julie Crooks is the curator of this new department, so Arts of Global Africa and the Diaspora. And I think back in 2018, Julie was in New York and had come across these, I think, treasure trove of images. There were about 3,500 of them, looking at 34 different countries in the Caribbean. There were historical images and, one of them at the AGO. So apparently she had called up Kenneth and they were sort of thinking about how do we make this happen? Now, what's most interesting, I think, to me is how exactly they did that. Kenneth has said they didn't want to go to a singular donor, someone who donated a ton of times, they wanted to really make this a community effort. So they called up members of Toronto's Black and Caribbean community and just started raising money. They sent emails, they called people, and over a couple of months, they were able to raise $300,000 to acquire these images, and 200 out of this larger collection. 200 of these images are being showcased at an exhibition now called Fragments of Epic Memory at the AGO.
So Ashley, we mentioned off the top, it was about a year ago when the Art Gallery established this new department, of first of its kind here in Canada. Can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of that department and what its sort of goal was?
Yeah, so the department will really focus on expanding the museum's collections and exhibits from Africa and the diaspora. But my sense when I was reporting this story is that the department really is intended to really just help deepen the museum's roots in the community. Alongside the department, there is a committee called Friends of Global Africa and the Diaspora, which really was created to support this department's work. And in that committee, there are about 17 members. They're all made up of everyone from art students to professionals, people who have experience in art, people who don't. And it's really about having these people really contribute to the department in some way, you know, whether it's kind of raising money for future acquisitions or really just supporting the work of the department itself. So the sense I really got is about deepening the museum's roots in the community.
And it really seems like, you know, sort of shrinking that gap as well. Some people may feel that the art community is quite exclusive in your reporting as well. Did you kind of see where that gap came from and how they're sort of addressing that as well?
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, people mentioned that, you know, you can't really have a diverse representation of people in the art community if you don't really ask them, if you don't kind of reach out to the people who you want to see be part of these committees or be part of these conversations and ask them to join. You know, so I think that that's what the museum is doing with this committee. But someone also mentioned to me that historically, you know, museums haven't always done right by people of color, Black people. You know, for example, she had mentioned especially maybe, for example, with museums in Europe, you know, going to museums and seeing art that's been looted or taken from, you know, African countries and things like that. So I think what really she felt when she was looking at this exhibit really felt like she was being welcomed. She was being asked to be part of something. I think that was really the sense. And that's how I think the exhibit is closing this gap.
So before we get into some photos of the exhibit, which is called Fragments of Epic Memory, I understand that this exhibit tries to answer a question, and that question is, how do we see Caribbean? What exactly does that mean?
You know, that's actually a really good question that I really didn't, I wish the piece kind of explored more, but the pictures that are in the exhibit go from 1840 to 1940. So this is, you know, post-emancipation. And I think that what it is, it shows different parts of the Caribbean, different countries in the Caribbean at different times throughout this time period. So I think what the exhibit tries to do is really show that there's no one singular story to the Caribbean. There are a lot of different countries, there are a lot of different cultures, there are a lot of different histories, and I think it does try to showcase all of that in a really nuanced way.
All right, so let's get into some of the artwork. And so this exhibit has a collection of both historical photos and contemporary art. This is obviously a historical photo. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yeah, sure. So it's a black and white photo from the Montgomery collection, and it's a photo of a woman who's dressed very regally with a headpiece. It's dated 1890. And the title of the photo is actually Unknown Martinique Women, which actually kind of tells you how far back these images go. So yeah, that's kind of one example.
Very interesting. So here we have another, this is a black and white photo with 5 women. I believe this is called Jamaican women. Tell us a little bit about this photo here.
Yeah, this is definitely another photo from the Montgomery collection, another historical photo. Like you said, it's black and white. It actually is of 5 women in Jamaica, and this is sort of post the abolishment of slavery. So this is also another one of those photos that kind of help tell that story of that period.
And this one's a bit of a departure from the first two. Again, more of the contemporary side. This one is called Untitled 7 Women. Tell us about this image.
Yeah, so this is by Paul Anthony Smith. It's kind of a multicolored depiction of women in what I'm, assuming can only imagine is sort of in Carnival. So they are in full headdress, with the pieces and the headpieces and the body pieces, and it's a really wonderful depiction of something that we've come to see, during the Carnival period.
All right, and then we have this image right here as well. This one is called Women's Carnival Group. Very beautiful here. Tell us what we're looking at.
And it's another, it's a painting by Gomo George. This is also at the exhibit. And it's another kind of multicolored picture of women and just people generally in a town square during a carnival period. And I think the image definitely goes on to showcase that vibrancy and that joy that usually happens during this period.
I'm curious, I know that you spoke to some people who got to go through the exhibit. I am curious, how has it been received in the community? But also, I'm curious to know, sort of with the younger Caribbean, sort of community here, how are they sort of taking in this exhibit and sort of seeing this stuff sort of for the first time?
I spoke to artists and, just, general art enthusiasts who went to see the show. And I think someone described it as a healing journey, which I thought was really interesting. Another person also described it as a bridge, right? So, a bridge to a place that she either hadn't been in a while or a culture that she had forgotten or just hadn't experienced as much as she would have liked to. So I think that that's kind of what a lot of people are seeing. It's a lot of people have said, I look at the pictures and I see people that look like my family members. I see people that look like my aunt, my uncle, my grandmother. So I think it really is definitely a storytelling experience for a lot of people, and they feel very connected to it personally.
And I should mention that the exhibit is open, has been open since September, and runs until February 21st. Ashley, I want to thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
The agenda this week tuned into the early days of election campaigning here in Ontario, debated decriminalizing illicit drugs, and considered vaccine mandates in the workplace. The agenda's week in review begins with Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole in his first one-on-one interview since the federal election.
I want to circle back to the issue of you because well, put it this way, I don't know what James Cumming, your former MP from Alberta, is going to come back with, but I suspect part of it is going to be, Erin O'Toole, I've known you for 20 years. I always thought of you as a sort of a moderate red Tory. But when you ran for the leadership of the party, you ran as a true blue Conservative. You hit all those hot buttons that true blue Conservatives love about cancel culture and privatizing CBC television and that kind of thing. And then when the election campaign started, you made a very deliberate decision to move your party to the more moderate middle in order to appeal to those liberal Tory switchers that you referred to earlier. I wonder if part of, I don't know, I'm just asking, I wonder if part of your problem here is that Canadians aren't clear in their own minds about what kind of a Conservative you are.
Well, I think there's some truth to what you're saying. Canadians not sure. They still don't know me as well as they think they might. In fact, our numbers went up dramatically as people got to know me, Steve. But our own exit polling said some of the people that considered us but didn't close the deal, they're telling us didn't know enough about Mr. O'Toole. So part of that is true. Part of it is not true. If you actually look at the leadership race, I'm a proud true blue Conservative, but I stand up for the rights of all Canadians, and I have since the day I walked in the House of Commons. So I was even attacked for my position on LGBTQ rights, for example, but I'll make no apologies. I was in uniform to fight for all Canadians' rights in our institutions, and I will always do that. I said we'd fallen short on climate change, and we needed a serious approach to tackling climate change. It's an important issue for me as a parent as much as it is a Conservative. And I'm a true blue Conservative. I've served in the military. I've never asked for anything. I've put myself through school. You know my own background. I'm from Bowmanville. I'm always going to fight for people that need a voice. And I don't believe people that define conservatism in one way or another. What are you putting forward as leader? That's always how I've conducted myself. So I'm still as true blue today as I was then, Steve.
Okay, but some of the members of your party obviously do define conservatism in one way or another, even if you don't. And if they thought, I know Erin O'Toole, he's a true blue Conservative who has these small c Conservative views on a whole range of issues, and I like that about him, And then they see a guy who's trying to sort of drag, in some cases, kicking and screaming members of the party more to the center to broaden your appeal. Can you understand why they would be quizzical about what kind of Tory you are?
Yes, and in fact, I don't profess that we were perfect. In fact, when I launched a very comprehensive climate change policy that has a price on carbon but not a carbon tax, we stumbled a bit on how that got out. It was leaked. I hadn't been able to brief my caucus. The caucus felt disappointed by that. But in the election campaign, I'll tell you, I got a lot of praise from people saying, hey, it was great to see the Conservatives brought up an innovative approach to meet our Paris targets without the economic disruption of Mr. Trudeau's carbon tax. I can do that better next time by, I think, engaging caucus better, by making sure we can get out and explain these issues better. But that some of those issues are being used as Aaron O'Toole departing from where he was in the leadership. But if you look, I was criticizing the leadership for saying we needed to be more serious on climate change. I want those urban voters in the maps you showed, Steve, to know that on any issue that is of concern to their family, the Conservatives of Canada will have a solution for you. It will be free market based, it will be smaller government, it's not going to be an Ottawa knows best approach, but we have to show we're tackling the issues of 2021.
The Premier said, quote, "The worst place you can give your money is to the government. It doesn't matter if it's municipal, provincial, or federal." Ginny, how should we interpret that?
Well, I think, we can always go back to the Ford family brand is strong. And I think one of the Premier's strengths is that he knows, he has sort of a gut instinct about how people feel about government and how they want government to intervene in their lives. They appreciate services. They appreciate things that only government can build, like highways and transit and all the things that he wants to say yes to. But at the end of the day, they don't want to be taxed into oblivion. I mean, his brother learned this by talking about the gravy train at the City of Toronto, and I think that remains. And don't forget, as these issues progress on the provincial landscape, there are a lot of things going on. There is inflation that appears to be potentially going to be sticking around a lot longer than people realize. The cost of living is going up. And I think people are going to become very, very, very sensitive to any kind of new tax or fee. And we know that when parties of the left are given power, they want to find a way to fund their promises. And they are more comfortable with taxing people than certainly Doug Ford is. And so he wants to remind people that he reduced their cost of living, and he wants to remind them, I think, that other parties would intervene and take more money out of their pockets if they were able to get power back.
Kim, what did you think when you heard the Premier say that?
That he still fundamentally doesn't understand the value of government and the value of supporting Ontarians. Look, this is a big province. It takes a lot of money to run, but there's also a lot of situations that can be recalibrated. Certainly healthcare can be recalibrated, but it has to be recalibrated in a way where people actually can access services. And I'll tell you, I grew up as a border kid outside of Windsor. You didn't have to look very far to understand how quickly you could become homeless by just having to go to the hospital. Those are not the things we want to see. But the corollary of that is that there are lots of services we do need to support people on, making sure that not only do you get to go to the doctor, but that, oh, wait, the prescriptions they write you can take. So being able to afford those things. People are understanding much more, especially in the last 2 years, the value of what governments can do, can be a part of, where they can be a force for good and for change, and frankly, where they can come up short. And what I know about Andrea Horwath, and I know people like to talk a lot about, oh, this is her, third or fourth kick at the can. The reality is she continues to grow. She continues to resonate with people. And what we're also seeing is that people are taking a look at her post-pandemic and go, okay, I now get where the value of governments are, where we can support our communities. And they're looking at her as potential premier, not just that steel town scrapper that we know and love, but what can she do? What can she bring to the table? And what's the team around her that can really make Ontario better?
Sumi, what was your view when you heard the Premier say the worst place you can send any money is to a government?
Well, I think it's missing the point that, I think people are suffering. Ontarians are struggling, and we need a government that is able to understand that and to be able to support support our Ontarians, whether it's providing living wages, to keep up with inflation, or restructuring our healthcare system to support all of the long-term care, or ensuring that we've got the right infrastructure for our education system with students going back into schools with the pandemic. We're looking for a government that understands and is empathetic, and that's, I think, what you'll get from the Ontario Liberal Party and its leader and its team. We're looking at $10 a day childcare, and understanding that the impact of childcare has on our working class families. A 4-day work week. We've understood what the pandemic has meant for Ontarians. Over 130,000 employees in Ontario have chosen family over work, and that we need to ensure that our working systems are able to recalibrate itself to understand the new normal. And we need a government and a leader that understands that just keeping the money in the bank is not all. Government is meant to support our Ontarians to ensure that they have the right services and infrastructure to be able to move forward with their lives. And in order to do that, we need to be able to fund it.
We are starting to see, I think, more and more employers say that if you don't get vaccinated, you may not have a job. I mean, the Toronto Transit Commission, the TTC, suggested the other day that their members have got to get vaccinated or they're fired. How concerned are you about your members being fired if they don't get the jab?
Well, Steve, of course we're concerned about workers for any reason not being at the workplace. Being fired, of course, is going to put an added stress on the workplace. We don't want to see any healthcare workers, obviously, get ill or die from this virus. We already lost 5 members, so definitely we support the vaccine mandates. It's about workplace safety. It's about knowing that you're protected and knowing that the person you're working shoulder to shoulder with is protecting you. But again, we do obviously have a staffing crisis that we talked about many times on your show. So the vaccine is adding to that crisis. But I have to tell you, Steve, it is not the only reason why workers are leaving the workforce and the sector. So absolutely, we're concerned about them not being at work and for whatever reason terminated or what is it? It's leave without pay. We need those workers to be at the workplace, and we need to find solutions for all of it, not just the vaccine.
No, I appreciate that, and you're quite right. We have had many discussions on this program about the difficulties that the people who do the jobs of some of the hardest jobs in society, we want to make sure they're on the job. But do you believe it is a reasonable response for an employer to say, particularly in healthcare, you must be vaccinated or you're out?
It's all about keeping people safe, and absolutely we support keeping the workers safe and healthy and, quite frankly, alive, and the people that they care for. SEIU has supported mandatory vaccinations. Our members, close to 80%, do, and they look at it, as I said, as a issue of workplace safety, protecting themselves, their co-workers, and the people that they care for.
Okay. Julie, how do small businesses that you represent feel about a vaccine mandate?
Well, we surveyed them in August, and it was split. 54% are in favor of vaccinations of employees in the workplace, 34% are against, and 12% are undecided. So the challenges are very different for a small business than a larger business. If the government doesn't make this law, and we're not suggesting that they do, the vulnerabilities for human rights and legal complaints are higher for small businesses. Although the Human Rights Commission did come up with a web post on September 22nd saying that you didn't have to accommodate individuals if they choose not to be vaccinated for personal reasons. However, I go back to my earlier point. If the government isn't making it law, small businesses are vulnerable to potential human rights and legal challenges, and they do have challenges with accommodating employees. It's easy for a large business to find accommodations for employees when they have hundreds or thousands of employees, but for a small business that has 3 to 5 employees to begin with, how do you make accommodations that are actually allowable?
Ryan, let me get you in here then. Do you believe it is legal for employers to fire employees if they don't get vaccinated?
I think that they can. I think when we start with the premise that an employer's job is to keep workers safe, having a policy where their employees have to get vaccinated certainly makes sense. Now, the caveat, which we've already discussed, is that if there's a human rights concern, and the only two so far that have been credible in the eyes of the law, are if there is a medical exemption, which has been limited, and also a religious exemption. Again, with religion, it's been limited as well. You haven't seen many cases that have been able to make it through the court system successfully. And with that, if an employer does let an employee go, they are entitled to severance. So I don't believe that an employer can let an employee go because they are not vaccinated and not pay them any severance.
Ryan, do you think employees are somewhat in the driver's seat here, particularly in the service sector, in as much as we're hearing there's a tremendous shortage of people to work in that sector right now? And if they don't want to get vaccinated, maybe that's something employers are just going to have to put up with?
Well, you're right. It's sector by sector, and certainly in the service sector, it looks to be that employees have the upper hand.
Let me put this quote to you from the Vancouver Police Chief, Adam Palmer, who's in favor of decriminalization, who said in July of 2020, if you arrest someone on possession of a drug, that's a very short-term action that doesn't provide any sort of solution. Whereas if we have someone and we can get them into a pathway of treatment, get them proper supports, then you have longer-term benefits. You've heard what Quam has had to say. You've heard what this Vancouver Police Chief has had to say. How do you respond?
Well, honestly, nobody knows the territory you just sketched out is unexplored territory. The idea of methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine being decriminalized, readily available, accessible, and on the streets in a way without intervention is unexplored territory. And we're already some degree seeing the ravages of the impact of that on our public health system in the United States, the degree to which we have moved from marijuana's cannabis capacity to be legalized into polydrug traffickers still present. And what we're seeing is a public health cost that's simply extraordinary. In the United States, nearly 100,000 people a year now are dying from overdoses. And the great majority of those are opioid-based. The users themselves get tolerance over time and need more and more until finally they degrade their health to such a degree that they either die or the morbidities are so high. The cost to the public health system is extraordinary. And the damage to the individuals and the loss of a generation is something we have to seriously entertain here as the prevalence rate climbs so steeply. Here's another dimension. Most drug users who are in serious drug use patterns intensify over time. And it's over time that we begin to see the ravages showing up. And they use multiple drugs simultaneously. So the same people who are overdosing on prescription drugs have on board at the time of their crisis illicit cocaine, illicit opioids such as fentanyl, illicit benzodiazepine taken inappropriately. They're polydrug users. And the crisis becomes when you decriminalize, you may have an acceptable level of provision of the drug through, say, cannabis, through Canada itself, providing some legal access to cannabis. But you also have the black market. It is not driven out. It is still present, and it capitalizes on the increased prevalence and on the increased intensification of the drug user's needs. So you still got a contaminated, dangerous, violent, coercive, black market trafficking operation going on outside. At the same time, you're trying to say to people, possess drugs, use them, and we won't interfere with you. You're igniting a real, genuine conflagration.
Quam, can I get you to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that most people would say that decriminalisation goes with increased access to supports, maybe regulation and safer supply of drugs. So there's a whole number of things you have to put in place. And so the truth is that the way we're going, the criminalisation has not worked. We have seen rising deaths. We have seen sort of use on the increase. And so usually when we have a social policy strategy which hasn't worked, the best thing to do is to try and rethink. We're talking about 5,000 deaths just from opioids, 5,000 deaths a year in Canada. And I think most people and most Canadians are now saying we need to rethink and we need to work out whether, if we believe that people have an illness, that then making them criminals for their illness is the right way of going.
But I guess the question
Can I just interrupt for a moment, please? Excuse me. I just wanted to respond
please
to the professor's commentary here. What one sees is you can contain and limit the damage. We still have forest fires. We still have pathologies of society, but we try to limit the extent of them and the total burden of them on society. And you have to have a criminal justice capacity to be able to say trafficking and possession and use have dimensions that are so injurious to the people we're trying to protect and save and to recovery, that we have to have some dimension of being able to leverage the circumstance. We can't simply give in and yield to what is highly dangerous.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, October 22nd, 2021. Monday, we're myth-busting the use of stem cells in vaccines, especially those at the heart of the fight against this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thank you for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, and Steve, we'll see you again on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman.